Thanks, Ashley. So I want to begin from where I left. In the interest of time, I'm also going to restrict the number of questions that I have and turn the floor over to the audience. But I think I want to pick up on the point about the regional consensus. And it's interesting that you had mentioned Russia and all the countries, but one country that was not mentioned here was China, and throughout the discussion. First is, how do we start beginning the process of the regional consensus? Where do we start? Of course, I think the United States has a critical role in the leadership to begin building the regional consensus. But what do you think the appetite here is currently, and where do we begin? And if you could comment on the role of China in all these. The question is to all panelists. And the next question is, there is also, I noticed that there was a consensus in the table about having a prosperous, stable, and peaceful Afghanistan, but the question of how to get there will depend on who you ask and when you ask. So if I ask you all again the same question about how do we get there, and if you wanted to offer 3 bullet point advice, how would you do that? I know it's easier asked than easier explained, so how would you do that? The last but not the least question that I wanted to ask is very specific to Ambassador Chowdhury, and this is, I think we heard about the Haqqani network in great detail, and it is there is still consensus amongst the policy elites, policy makers in Delhi and in Washington and across my own colleagues in the Beltway that Pakistan does provide safe havens to the terrorists, and it's a terrorist organization. And how does Pakistan still provide to a designated terrorist organization, and how would you respond to your critics on that point? So I'll start with Ashley and then work our way down.
Well, I'd make 2 points on the question of how you reconstruct a regional consensus. First, there is no substitute to the US leading the process. The reason why I think the regional consensus has broken down is because every important actor in the region does not see the United States sufficiently and enduringly committed. And therefore, each of the actors believes it has to buy its own insurance with respect to its interests. If that happens, the fracturing of the consensus that we've seen occurring in the last 5 years or so is only going to gather steam. And so I think the first important point is for the US to reaffirm that commitment. The second is to work with the Afghan state. You cannot have a regional consensus on Afghanistan over the head of the Afghan state. So it has to be in partnership with the Afghan state. And the third will require that engagement that both ambassadors, Khalilzad and Chowdhury, emphasized. But it will also, in the process, require us to deal with some hard issues. And the issues of the Taliban, the issues of Afghan state failure, and the issues of what the regional equities are with respect to Afghanistan all have to be brought to the table in an honest conversation.
Bharat, that's a very interesting conundrum that you've articulated. While I agree with Ashley entirely that it needs to be possibly a US-led process, but we need to also recognize that the situation which brought about that consensus in 2001 no longer really exists. So you had a cataclysmic event in 2001. The United States had legitimate reasons to go down the path that it went down. Certain people voluntarily came on board. Other people were compelled under coercion of being bombed back into the Stone Age, and they came on board. And so therefore you had a situation whereby things did work out till the time the US got distracted by the conflict in Iraq. You have a situation today whereby the United States is also wary after 2 wars. There is a considerable body of opinion in Washington, D.C., which looks towards disengaging. So therefore, and there are other players who have matured between 2001 and 2017. So, it's not the same Russia as it was in 2001. It's not the same China as it was in 2001. And possibly it's not even the same Taliban which was in 2001. So therefore, bringing all these stakeholders onto a common unified position whereby all of them align their vision as to what a peaceful, stable, progressive Afghanistan means, looks to be a kind of a utopia, to put it very honestly. So therefore, I think while it is something which needs to be attempted, but the subliminal strategy of attrition, whereby those people or those forces which continue to be a problem for the Afghan state, continue to have a destabilizing influence, they need to be neutralized, they need to be brought within control. And if there is a semblance that the Afghan National Army, which has held out for such a long time, and the Afghan state reassert themselves, I think the possibility of a regional consensus would become far more brighter or far more greater, because as things stand today, because of the slide, different aspirations and different interests have not only manifested themselves but are actually playing themselves out on the ground.
Thank you, Bharat. I understand you asked me 3 questions to all panelists, 2 of them and 1 for me. A role of China and how to achieve the objective we all agreed, which was a sovereign, independent, peaceful Afghanistan. And the third one about the safe havens attributed to HN, Haqqani Network. China was part of a process called QCG, Quadrilateral Coordination Group, that was formed in the beginning of last year, where 4 nations, Pakistan, Afghanistan, United States and China, decided to form this group and give it a big shot. And I think they met successfully for 5 meetings until May, and they prepared a roadmap. And the roadmap wanted all of them to reach out to the Taliban and then come back and then, see if we can all compel them, to use that word, to compel them to come to the table. We fully shared that roadmap and that objective. Unfortunately, the leader of the Taliban that we were negotiating with was killed by a drone strike on 21st May last year, and that was the end of that particular process. And ever since, this whole reconciliation with Taliban has remained stalemated. And once it was stalemated, we were advised by our Afghan friends and our American friends that the solution lies in squeezing space on the Taliban and weakening them to the point that they come on the table. And we started doing that. So that's why today you don't find those sanctuaries that are being talked about the Haqqani Network or the Taliban. They are on the run, and that's why it's an open offer to any journalist or any scholar to come, and we will facilitate you. We'll like you to go there and see for yourself if they actually exist. That's why I'm saying that if you continue to live in the past and try to address these challenges of today, it may not be possible. What can we do to get to that objective? Much of what Mr. Ashley Tellis says, I think, makes a lot of sense to me. I think you need to have, first of all, we want to treat Afghanistan as an independent sovereign state. At least in Pakistan, there is absolutely no desire to subordinate any government in Afghanistan to Pakistan's interests, or for it to become sort of, Pakistan's hedge or bet. No, we don't want that. We are against hegemony, and that's why we are also resisting against India for its hegemony, because we are a relatively smaller country than India. And therefore, we are very conscious that we should not impose on Afghanistan what we don't like to get from India. And therefore, this whole strategic equation has to be, to us, it's very, very clear. I could also address in this context the India-Pakistan mention that was made by Minister Tiwari. That's a very, very important part of the equation. We have a sense that India does have strategic interests in Afghanistan which are beyond the benign development interests. It could well be a part of a double squeeze on Pakistan, because for India it's not Afghanistan, it's the Pakistan which poses challenges, and therefore if India can use double squeeze or two-front situation whereby Pakistan is obliged to keep 200,000 troops on its western frontier and 150,000 on LOC and the border, then of course it makes more sense for India to do that. And to that end, an Afghanistan which is not stable will actually serve India's interests, and that is why Indian government has been opposing reconciliation with the Taliban of any kind. We believe that with reconciliation, whatever it is, should be led by Afghan government, should be led by should be Afghan owned, and Afghan government should take that responsibility, and Pakistan should facilitate that. We did try twice. On 7th of July 2015, on a Ramadan night, just like we are in Ramadan, in the city of Murray, after Iftar, right up to Seher, it happened, and I was there because I was moderating that evening, along with Chinese and the Americans who were sitting with us. And it was a first time that the Taliban sat face to face with a government, and it was important because they recognized that as the legitimate government. This was an important step forward. And they recognized that, and they also agreed to work on a number of other deliverables. But unfortunately, before the second meeting could take place on 31st of July, on 29th July, the news of death of Mullah Omar broke, and then everything came to a standstill again. But we are still committed to that objective. We believe that it should be done by Afghan government. We are going to be fully supportive. We are not deterred or we are not distracted by the hostile rhetoric that comes from Afghan leaders. We believe that we should not react, and we will not react, and we have not reacted in the last 2 years because we think that Afghanistan needs to be stable. If there is one country which will benefit the most from that is Pakistan, and therefore we want to work with the United States, and we want to work with all countries of the world.
Ambassador, I wanted to interrupt you here before I give it to Zal. In this point, what took Pakistan 2.5 years to declare Mullah Omar's death? Just one, if you could clarify.
All right, Mullah Omar never left Afghanistan. The news that was leaked by NDS from Kabul to BBC was that Mullah Omar died in a hospital in Karachi in 2013. That was the news. Now that was wrong. It was absolutely, he never came to Pakistan. His brother and his son went there and exhumed the grave, and he never left Zabul actually. He was buried in Zabul. And therefore, the entire Taliban, etc., they live in murky areas. They don't declare that this is our headquarters, etc. They just operate. And therefore, I think it had been successfully hidden by Mullah Akhtar Mansoor and once it came out, he saw a major challenge to his leadership.
Zal.
Well, I first would like to say that I agree with Minister Tiwari and with Ashley that a lot of progress has been made in Afghanistan. We shouldn't not lose sight of that. As someone who went there after 9/11, the Afghanistan of then and the Afghanistan of now, it's a huge difference. There are institutions that did not exist that now do exist. But of course there are challenges and that the Afghans have that confront. And if we stick with the same objectives that has been described, at least the U.S. objective, since we are here discussing in the context of U.S. policy review, is in order to not to have spaces in which terrorists can find a home and prosper, the Afghan state not only needs to be preserved but needs to be strengthened. That's a better alternative given the options one faced than some of the others. And I think no one has made on this, at least panel, maybe someone in the audience would, that there is a better alternative to that. And that negotiations is also important to achieve that goal. Now, I disagree a little bit, although on the regional issue in this following way. I think there's a false consensus, perhaps maybe there never was really perhaps a true consensus. But right now, I think even on this panel, you could get the impression that what is the problem given that we all are saying essentially the same thing. And I wouldn't blame the audience to be a little confused as to if Pakistan wants the same thing as Afghanistan, and if India wants the same thing as Afghanistan, Pakistan, if the U.S., and so on and so forth, then why is there this problem? I just find that it's very hard to believe that this problem exists. Somehow it comes from the sky, so to speak. It doesn't. These problems do not rain from the sky. And in particular, I think, before we talk about the broader consensus, which we will need, there is a need to sort of bring an understanding between Afghanistan and Pakistan. I think that is central in my judgment. And I do differ with my very distinguished, very accomplished colleague, that the reality is a little more complicated, a little more difficult, to say that Mullah Omar never left Afghanistan, for example. I mean, we have pretty firm evidence of which mosque he was praying in while he was in Pakistan, and where did he go for medical treatment, where his son visited him, and where did his brother go to see him. For a long time there was the idea that Osama bin Laden never left Afghanistan, we of course also know that the Haqqani network sometimes is said is not in Pakistan. And I think Pakistan has done a very good job of going after the terrorist and extremist forces that have threatened Pakistan. But I think there was ample evidence that as the operations were going on against the Pakistani Taliban and others that in Pakistan, Haqqani network was being evacuated to safer areas. I think what we need is in order to make progress, maybe this is not the right forum, but we need it at some forum. At least the U.S. needs to be convinced: is there a sanctuary? And I think that is a broad consensus on that it still exists. The question really is, how do we convince Pakistan without maybe admitting or not admitting publicly? The question is, what is required, what will it take for Pakistan and Afghanistan to address, what is Pakistan's, Ashley said, is minimum or second best sort of concerns, and then that the Afghans can deliver, and in exchange, what is the delivery on the other side? Because without that, and that has to be factual and reliable and verifiable. So that's, I think, is needed, and I have been an advocate myself of that we need to put a lot more pressure on Pakistan, put on the table, and a lot more carrots, both more of each, because what we have put on the table so far has not been productive. has not been as effective as we would like it to be. So we need to look at that, and in my judgment, the review must come to terms with this dilemma, and it just can't be about the 3,000 to 5,000 troops, although that may be necessary, as it has to come to terms with some other things. So that is, I think, the heart of the problem. As I said, even the distinguished ambassador is saying that maybe the situation has changed. Maybe there was a sanctuary earlier, but there is no longer a sanctuary. I don't know whether you will even say, maybe I don't want to put words in your mouth as to whether there was.
Good idea.
Yeah, but even if you say, when I went there in 2005, and there was the issue that there are no Taliban in Pakistan. Where are they? Give me their phone numbers, their addresses. You can't really get to somewhere serious in terms of progress, at least by wink and a nod, that if not by actual statement, to get to some understanding of the trade. And I think Pakistan has the right to. Afghan territory should not be used against Pakistan by Pakistani terrorists or extremists, and there has to be Afghan territory shouldn't be used by India against Pakistan, and all that. Those are legitimate issues that should be put on the table if there are concerns about. But the legitimate issue on the other side, that these folks are conducting a big war, they start against the coalition, against the Afghan forces. It's just not some people, buried in the mountains somewhere. I have to admit to one thing, which, I was also involved, some of you may not know this, I'm old enough, in our war against the Soviets in Afghanistan. I was working for the State Department. And our assumption was, of course, at that time that ultimately the Soviets would prevail. And we obviously, with help from Saudi Arabia and others, conducted a huge level of effort. And some mistakes were made to make the cost of the Soviet occupation as high as possible. And some of the talking points that I hear in Pakistan was a great partner in those days, now being used are the same talking points that were used at that time, which was, well, this is, this is all internal, the borders are long, who knows what goes on there. And I think this sounds a lot like that, and I believe that we're partners, we've had a history of good relations, we've done big things together at times in the past, and in order to get back to that, it has to be more on the level, and I believe that there are, as I said, legitimate issues that both sides have that the U.S. perhaps can be helpful in reconciling. Sorry, I took a little longer. But
I see a lot of hands going up. With the permission of the panelists, I'd like to extend this to 12:15, if you can spare
12:15, because I have heavy lunch at 12.
too.
Me too.
So, but we'll have a hard stop in 12:15.
Okay.
Please introduce yourselves.
I will send
Keep your
myself.
questions extremely short.
Take
And the
a
remarks-
lot of questions that
And
you
I'll
want
take-
at once.
I have Daisy, I have Ramin, and I have you. And
Daisy Schaefer, former Foreign Service, McLarty Associates. The consensus that you described was a consensus on the non-contentious issues.
Yeah, good.
My question is, how do you deal with the ones that actually are contentious? Pakistan's desire to minimize Indian influence in Afghanistan, India's desire to minimize Pakistan influence in Afghanistan,
That's it.
and the discordance between the interests of the United States and Iran.
oh, thank you.
Good.
Ramin,
Iran is good, yeah.
I'll come to this side of the next one.
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you, Bharat, for hosting this event, and also I thank the panelists for taking the time to discuss this important topic. There are many points that we need to discuss, which are very controversial. But since time is limited, I just want to focus
Could
on
you
some
speak
of
into the
them.
mic, please?
Yes. Okay, good.
Who's this guy?
Thank you, Ambassador Jewelry, for condemning the attacks in Kabul recently.
Uh-huh.
And it's our hope that someday Pakistan takes strong actions against those militants. Okay. Thanks. I think some of the issues that you raised during your talk are against some issues that are evidence-based, and there is some sort of international consensus that there are elements of insurgency in Pakistan, and there is over support for them inside Pakistan. So I think we have passed that phase of considering these as claims or allegations against each other. So that phase has passed. We are now in a phase that we need a more constructive dialogue, to reach an outcome that is, beneficial for all sides in the region. If we don't acknowledge the problems, if we, discuss the same old stories that have been going on in the past, I think we're not going to reach a solution that's, constructive and to the benefit of all parties. And also, I want to, point to the Ambassador Khalizad's points on carrots and sticks. I think Pakistan has been, receiving the carrots, and it doesn't take those carrots.
I don't think he agrees with that.
And nothing has been achieved, so there should be a different approach. And, I hope the panelists, talk about that. Thank you.
I have the person right next.
My name is Ubaidullah Ubaid. I'm a graduate student at Georgetown University. Good discussion. Thank you very much for being here. A quick question. To best of your knowledge, what are the Pakistan's interests in Afghanistan? I know it's very idealistic. Prosperous Afghanistan is in the national interest, but that is not going to take us anywhere. We all know that. To your understanding, what are Pakistan's interests in Afghanistan? Within Afghanistan, what are they?
Sure.
Generally.
Okay. So a quick.
I couldn't go first because I then
Yes, to go.
might enable me to.
Sure.
Yeah.
We'll come back.
No, there's
All
no
right.
time to come back.
All right. Thank you very much for your questions. I think what the consensus is that we need a peaceful Afghanistan. You asked what are Pakistan's legitimate interests. Only two. A peaceful Afghanistan, a peace with itself, a stable Afghanistan, a sovereign Afghanistan, a prosperous Afghanistan. That's what we need, because that instability, whenever it happens, comes to us. That is one. Second, Afghan soil should not be used against Pakistan. That's it. That's it, by whoever. So these are the only two legitimate interests that we have. Other than that, we want to facilitate. We believe that the solution, as Ambassador Zalmay Khalil has rightly pointed out, the key is Pakistan-Afghanistan relationship. But how do you do that?
Right.
How do you do that? So that is why a comprehensive approach is required. You need political level contacts, you need mill to mill, military to military, intelligence to intelligence, diplomatic to diplomatic. You need a sustained mechanism and framework which can absorb all the shocks and then move on. Because we have a consensus in Pakistan which is working against terrorists, which has shown results in Pakistan. And we want to do the same in Afghanistan. We want Afghanistan to do the same in Afghanistan. But of course that would require a lot of cooperation. But just blaming Pakistan all the time, will it help? No. I don't think so. Honestly. Just you can blame, you can do catharsis, but that won't help. What will help is that you see and recognize what Pakistan has done in Pakistan itself, and whether that can be replicated in Afghanistan. Thank you, sir.
Sure. Ashley?
I think there are three specific interests that Pakistan has in Afghanistan. The first is to prevent Afghanistan from becoming a reverse sanctuary for terrorists attacking Pakistan. The second is to limit Indian presence in Afghanistan because of fears that Indian activities in Afghanistan are directed against Pakistan. And the third is to secure Afghanistan's consent to a recognition of the Durand Line as the permanent border between Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Yourself, and keep your.
Thank you very much. It was a wonderful discussion. My name is Nazira Azim Karimi. I'm correspondent for Ariana Television Network from Afghanistan. Mr. Ambassador, Mr. Chowdhury, you mentioned that Afghan government all the time blame everything to Pakistan, like the big car bomb, which has killed more than 150, and many people get injured. So, based off your opinion, do you think that Afghan government like dumb or without any responsibility, they blame, or they took the big responsibility? Number two, me as a journalist, every day I do interview with some of the high official member of Congress. This is not the only Afghan government that, as you said, blame Pakistan. Even congressmen like Robakar, a week ago, I did an interview, and they also have the same statement that Pakistan is a safe haven for terrorists.
Thank you. And I'll have you and I'll have you. Keep it very short.
Jalil Afridi from the Friendship Post. From Zalmes, how do you feel about Mr. Ghani has said that they're going to open an office for the Taliban, and Hekmatyar is back, who during your leadership was declared terrorist. How do you feel about the future of the Taliban office and with the Hekmatyar leadership? What do you think about it?
Yeah, and I'll take that one.
Heather Robinson from Cigar. Thank you very much for your comments. We have talked surprisingly little this time about Iran's role in Afghanistan. I wanted to actually ask Ambassador Chowdhury, given Pakistan's diplomatic relations with Iran and coordinating on regional issues, in your experience in interacting with the Iranians, what do you think their historical interests are in Afghanistan and how they changed over time? And is Pakistan pursuing any type of strategy to dissuade the Iranians from supporting the Taliban at this time?
So, again, a 1-minute response. You want to go first?
Well, on the issue of Taliban office, I don't see a problem with that. If the Afghan government would like to have a Taliban office open somewhere, and the Taliban would like to open that office, it's not for me or for others from afar to judge that. Our key concern, the U.S. has been the renunciation of terror and distance itself from terrorism. And the issue really that the U.S. faces is one that Ashley alluded to, or maybe mentioned it more directly than I'm just alluding, is whether the U.S. should participate more directly in discussions with the Taliban. That's kind of a more serious, consequential issue, and that has to be, in my view, a part of the kind of the review process.
I think the Ariana correspondent asked me the question, why is it that this impression prevails? It prevails because after 15 and 16 years of huge investments in blood and treasure, as was mentioned, there's nothing to show for. So you need a scapegoat.
That's not fair.
I mean,
nothing to show for it.
All right. Okay. There is a lot to show for.
Okay.
All right. There is a lot to show for. But okay. Sorry. There is a lot to show for in terms of all that Mr. Ashley rightly pointed out. I concede that. But
we're making progress. I like.
We're making progress, but we are not there yet. We're not there yet because the area under control of Afghan National Security Forces has shrunk, right? That was not funny. It's actually sad because Afghan National Security Forces should be in full control of the entire territory, and that we don't want ungoverned spaces there. But scapegoating Pakistan to justify failures in Afghanistan is not a good solution.
But what if Pakistan has a role in the problems of Afghanistan?
Pakistan does not have a role. We have reversed the tide of terrorism in a time and in a region when everybody else is still struggling. And we have shown the results. And I invite you all go and see the results rather than scapegoat Pakistan.
You are lying in a big responsibility.
I have to go. Thank you.
Me too.
Thank you.
No, I was just responding to that question about about India's interests in Afghanistan.
I had more time.
Sorry, Minister.
Thank you very much. All right, kind.
Great to see you.
Mr. Minister Tiwari, pleasure meeting you. Very articulate, and it was such a delight to sit.
Whenever you're in Delhi.
Besides you.
Bye.
This is the first time I have. Yes, I love this.
Good. We can have some coffee too.
Sure.
I appreciate it.
Thank you.
I was, I can answer it offline.
I didn't say it was unreasonable.
No,
but
what I
think
think what India needs to do is actually have a conversation in Pakistan about what Indian and Pakistani interests in Afghanistan are. India and Pakistan and Pakistan do not want to have this conversation. And I don't think the conversation is sort of happening in 2019 given the state of play at this point in time.
unfortunately,
Yeah.
there was a legislative report that came out from the last two
administrations who had
Jinnah Institute put out an interesting report on the influence of the role of the regional countries in Afghanistan. And the burden of the report was everyone agrees the best solution